Welcome to the Justice Journal podcast. I'm Sacramento County District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert. I hope you enjoy this podcast series where we discuss important public safety issues and provide insight into who we are as an office and what we do both in the courtroom and in the community to provide the highest level of public safety through prosecution, prevention, and innovation.
Welcome to the Justice Journal podcast. I'm Shelley Oreo. This episode, we're going to present ways to prevent our kids from becoming victims of online child sexual predators who contact victims through social media apps, gaming apps, and other online devices and platforms. My guests today are Principal Criminal Attorney Leland, Washington, Sheriff Detective Christie Hirota, and Scott Meyer from the Child Welfare for the Folsom Cordova Unified School District. Welcome, everyone.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
So Leland, Christy, and John, please introduce yourselves and tell us about your roles within your organizations. Leland, we'll start with you.
Okay. I'm a principal criminal attorney here at the district attorney's office. I've been an attorney for over 18 years, and I'm currently assigned to the community and government relations division of the DA's office.
Christy?
I'm Detective Christie Hirota. I'm with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, and I've been there for 17 years, and currently I'm assigned to the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. I've been there for about 6 years, and all over the United States, there are Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. Each state has at least one, and because of California's size, we have 5 of them, and so the Sacramento Sheriff's Department is the Internet Crimes Against Children. I'll cite ICAC, it's a little bit easier to say, for this region. So we cover all the way up to the Oregon border, a little bit past Stockton. So we've got a large area. So besides, of course, investigating cases such as internet crimes, we have cyber tips that we get from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And then we also educate parents and teachers and children in the community with regards to how to be safe with the internet.
Scott?
Yeah, my name is Scott Meyer. I'm Child Welfare for the Folsom Cordova Unified School District. I've worked for the district for 15 years. With Child Welfare, anything to do with child safety falls under my umbrella. And internet has played a large role and continues to grow, whether it's cyberbullying, cyber stalking. We're seeing sexting. We're seeing a lot of challenges at all ages. And there's not a week that goes by where I'm not receiving or working with a school, working with families.
Christy, I'm going to start with you. Since you're on the high-tech Crimes Against Children Task Force, can you give us more of a backdrop of what the kids are facing today in terms of cyber threats, predators, and the magnitude of the problem that you're seeing, at least within your jurisdiction?
So with the kids right now, we are, just like Scott mentioned, every single week we are getting calls for service. We're getting cyber tips with regards to kids that are talking to strangers. And my goal is always to try and educate parents all the time because they don't understand how this is really huge. And it definitely is affecting kids as young as, 8, 9 years old. We've got cases on. Kids right now are being targeted in so many different ways that we would not normally think of. So one of the things is predators will sometimes just what we call phishing. They'll just start throwing out words and conversations out to anybody. And there's that one child who might be lonely or having issues at school, and they will bite and they'll start having conversation. And it's pretty simple because the suspect will look at their social media and see things that they have posted, like where they go to school or what sports they might play, and use that information to strike up a conversation. Oh, I see that you like playing soccer. And then the person will start talking about soccer. So they'll definitely start having conversations and what we call grooming and talking about things that are similar and in common and making them feel really good because maybe they're sad. And they'll say, hey, your picture, you're a pretty girl, and kind of flatter them.
So they'll throw a bunch of those out and just see what sticks and see who responds.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally a fishing game. You just start throwing lines out there and someone will bite. 100% will happen. It happens. It's very, very common for that to happen. A lot of the times kids are being contacted. They're starting off with gaming devices. So there's normally a trend. They'll start on gaming devices, start chatting with strangers. They'll start talking to somebody. They'll move on to an app. Once the app they start chatting there, they'll move on to texting on their cell phone. And then the texting turns into conversations, and then it turns to FaceTiming or Skyping, and then it turns into meetings. So that's definitely a trend that we are seeing all the time.
So a gaming app is the point of entry in a lot of the
Yes,
cases.
it is significant. It definitely is the way they're starting.
So is that then primarily reaching boys versus girls because they tend to be more the gamers, or is it equal?
It's actually across the board. It's both girls and boys, but I will say that there's quite a few boys, and you wouldn't think that a boy would be a target. That you would think it would be girls, but it definitely is. I would say our caseload is a lot of boys more than girls, just by a little bit for that reason. But a lot of times these kids are playing with other juveniles who they think are their age, and then there's the ones that are adults that are portraying themselves to be younger. So there's definitely the same type of trends that are going on in patterns with kids.
What are some of the more common internet crimes being committed against these children?
So once the kids start communicating, one of the things is they begin sending nude photographs of themselves to these predators, and then it's sextortion. So sextortion is essentially the suspect will ask the child for photographs. And then if the child doesn't, they'll say, okay, well, then I'm going to tell your parents that you're talking to me. So there's a lot of extortion going on. There's a lot of sexting going on where the child is communicating with them sexually. And
so sextortion, though, can't happen until the kid actually sends pictures of themselves.
Well, there's that for sure. The other thing is the predator will ask the child to send photographs, and the child will say no. But then the predator will say, I will send pictures of another child that they've collected, send it to your parents and say that those are you. And so that sometimes will occur. I mean, it actually happens quite a bit where the kid does end up sending photographs because they're young and they don't know better. And so they're scared.
So then, Scott, tell us about your experience and what you're seeing out at the high schools when it comes to online social media.
Right. And I'd echo what Christie said, not just with high schools, but also our middle schools and even elementary. With the average 10-year-old now having a smartphone, I was 18 when I had my first phone, and it didn't have the capabilities that a smartphone has. So we're seeing challenges across the board at very young ages. And one of the obstacles that I see is a lot of our parents were from the generation where it was don't talk to strangers, don't take candy from strangers, don't get in that van. That's changed. And as Christie said earlier, we're having these predators that can target hundreds of kids in a day. It's so much easier sitting in a basement. And I feel a lot of our 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds are getting these phones without any supervision. We're taught not to give our information out to strangers, but for whatever reason, our students were born into this technology and they feel comfortable sharing everything, what school they go to, their name, where they live. And that can be extremely challenging from the school standpoint, and I know law enforcement as well. So we're seeing, we have had a number of cases of sextortion, which a lot of, I think our parents never have heard of until it's too late. I think the biggest challenge I've seen too is it's kind of like getting robbed. You never expect to get robbed until it happens. And every time we work with families, they just never see it coming until it's too late. And then things go viral. We've had students have to leave the district. We've worked very closely with our law enforcement. And again, these aren't isolated cases. This is almost weekly. We're having cyberbullying or a heavy case.
We know this is a really big problem, and I feel like it's overwhelming and something that is not easily dealt with. But let's talk about some of the things that we are doing to try to educate and do what we can to prevent victims of online child sexual predators. Leland, let's start with you. What is the DA's office doing to educate and protect our youth from what Christie and Scott have both described as a pervasive public safety issue for our kids?
When Anne-Marie was elected in 2015, she created the CGR unit. One of the missions of the CGR unit was intervention, prevention, and education. And something that came aware to the to the people working in the unit and working in CGR was the idea of internet and social media was an ongoing problem. And one of the things that kind of made this problem so unique was the fact that it really crosses all social, economic, race, gender lines in terms of it affected everyone. And it was one of the things that was growing and growing. And literally every young person and child who has access to a computer or a cell phone was affected by this, and it was becoming a real problem to public safety. So this became one of the first projects of the CGR division was to create this program called iSMART, which stands for Internet, Social Media Awareness, Resources, and Training. And the iSMART program was actually modeled after another program that dates all the way back to 2002 that our office had been doing called GIF, which was Gun Violence Information for Teens, which was based on scenarios. So they kind of took the model of that scenario-based things, but applied it to the education on social media and internet awareness. And this project that they undertook, it was the first of its kind in the States. There wasn't a model for our CGR division to use. They kind of started from scratch. But one of the things that they're always trying to be mindful of is that we're trying to use collaboration with other entities who are trying to achieve the same goals. Some of the entities that we collaborated with were the Sacramento City Unified School District, the Sacramento County of Education, Sacramento Probation Department, the Sheriff's Department, and the Police Department, all to kind of get their input and their help in terms of putting together a program that we think can be relevant and can be effective. The iSMART program is a program that is now available for middle schools, high schools, but also the parent component, where we're educating students, parents about the dangers about social media, how to protect themselves, and just being aware of some of the things that are out there, and just making everyone more, basically educate them on the dangers and just how to deal with it. And because the fact of the matter is, so many of these children aren't yet able to even understand the power they have in these phones. And iSMART tries to kind of bring that to life for them and hopefully have them respect it and be smart on how they use it.
This is a free program. So give us some examples. What are some specifics that iSMART covers?
Well, iSMART, we do it through a couple different vignettes. And vignette means we have scenarios that we have set up where we go through different situations. Those scenarios are, for instance, cyberbullying, sexting, sextortion, online stalking, online stranger. And there's 5 different ones, and there's even also one on gangs. So technically there's 6. And in each particular one, what you do is you go through a real life scenario with the students, and it focuses on, from beginning to end, how a particular person got involved in a social media crisis. And what I think is unique about it is it's interactive. So it doesn't allow the student to just sit there and just have us talk to them. The students, they have to be part of it. So as we go through the scenario, the students have to answer questions. We put themselves in the place of what would you do if you were in that situation? And the main thing that we keep hammering home is if you are in the situation or you know someone that is, this is what you do. And we always contact an adult. Contact a teacher, contact a counselor, of course, contact your parents, any adult that you know that you trust, anyone that you trust. But the key thing that you have to do is you're ever in one of these situations is that you have to tell someone. And that's always the underlying basis of what we're doing. And we threw it through these different scenarios. And as the technology continues to grow, we're continuing trying to update our scenarios and become more relevant, because it's so hard to stay relevant in terms of the social media aspect of it, because apps are changing, the way that kids are using it are changing. But the most significant thing that I've seen is how the need to educate the younger kids becomes more and more prevalent. Where when we started, we were focusing on middle school and high school, and now, from like Christie's saying, the focus needs to be on elementary school, because these children have these phones and they have a lot of power in them and they're very vulnerable.
Scott, you had mentioned that you have 10-year-olds that have smartphones. What is your experience and thought about iSMART from your experience? I understand you've co-presented. And how do you feel about that program reaching kids at a much younger age?
Well, all the topics are relevant and are things we're seeing in our backyard. It's powerful having a district attorney, and we often use our school resource officers or myself, come in as a kind of a neutral party, but they also have real life stories that are happening in our backyard as opposed to a small town in Florida 10 years ago. So when they come in with those stories and consequences, even the students that might not be talking are listening. And that's a lot of the feedback we're getting.
And you can tell them that you've seen this in your district. So
Correct.
It's not just some story off in another state.
And I think that's where we get some wide eyes, and that's really the power in this, and having those conversations. And it will look different. Leland will attest to this, class to class. And I can't tell you how many times we've had students come ask if they can talk to us after class. So I know the message is getting through, and it's a very proactive piece. But as mentioned earlier, it's happening at a younger and younger age. So that brings some challenges.
What's the response been, Leland, from other schools in different districts? Does it play the same pretty much across the board, or does it vary?
Well, the different classes, it kind of can vary from class to class. And we do iSMART. We're probably as active in Folsom School District than any other, because we do every 10th grade class in the Folsom Unified School District. But also we had a class at Folsom High where we did an iSMART class, and it went out to the whole school. So we were able to webcast it to 1,500 kids at one time. But we do it to middle schools throughout. And the same thing I would say that's consistent is that you have some kids that are very attentive. Some, like Scott saying, aren't paying much attention, but from the teachers and from everyone involved, they do recognize, I think, the need for it. And it's kind of two prongs of what we're trying to do. While we're trying to talk about keeping safe from the aspect of, not becoming a victim, we also try to educate them in smart use of the phones, because we're also telling them information about when you post something about how it can be detrimental to your future. If you're posting negative things where you're using, maybe you're presenting yourself in a way, you're saying things in a way that can come back later to haunt you when someone Googles you and they see a post and maybe you're doing something with the firearm, or maybe you're doing something with alcohol and things like that, how it can affect their future. The older kids seem to be more interested and responsive to thinking about how misuse of the internet and the phones can deal with their future. I think the younger kids, I think the 8th and 9th grade, 10th graders, they were very much, they know this stuff, but it's almost like hearing about it. They're like, okay, this is a real thing. And what really gets them, I think, their attention, what Scott talks about, is when they recognize that these are cases and things that actually happened in their community.
You also talk about legal consequences, because it is a crime to do sexting and send pictures across online, correct? I mean, it's different.
It absolutely is. And in every class, every iSMART, and Scott knows we talk about, we let them know, for you to take a photograph of yourself and you're a minor, inappropriate, naked photograph, you've created child pornography. And if you passed it on to someone else, you're distributing child pornography, and it's potentially a felony. And they're like, even if it's just a picture of myself, it's like, yes, because that picture, if it gets in the hands of someone else, that's what it is. And it seems like they're actually shocked by that idea. That's by taking like a nude picture, or, that they don't send to anyone, that they've potentially put themselves in a situation where they've created something that could be the basis of a crime.
Because it's one thing to say this is going to affect your future, whether it's college or career. And it's another to say that there could be a criminal legal consequence to doing something like that. Correct. And I think it's important to set that in their minds early.
Besides the criminal aspect of these consequences, you can also have civil consequences. So, for example, if you are cyberbullying somebody else and that child ends up hurting themselves, then your parents can be civilly responsible. And plus, you don't want that on your shoulders either, that you're responsible for someone's death, because that's another big, huge trend is forcing kids to harm themselves.
Leland, you mentioned that you're trying to keep it fresh and keep up with, the changing environment in social media. Christie, I think it's a very difficult task to keep on top of the latest apps. And there's, I think, what are those ghost apps, I think, too, where kids can easily hide things
and
they're
now
doing.
the dark web, too.
What are some basic things, principles, behaviors that kids and parents should know across the board that would help them avoid becoming targeted and becoming victims?
One of the things I tell parents from the very beginning, that when you are giving your child a device, you're literally giving the entire world access to your child. So like when you provide them the keys to a vehicle, you're going to teach them on how to drive. So same thing with the cell phone. You don't just hand them a cell phone, because I know that's what's happening. And so when you give them a cell phone, you need to educate them, tell them these are some of the things that are going to happen if you have a cell phone, make sure that you tell your kids, don't talk to strangers that you don't know. I always tell parents, tell your children they should pretty much be talking to people that they know face to face. And that sometimes people that they are talking to may not really be who they say they are. Don't take pictures of yourself and send them to anybody. And even if it's your boyfriend this week, next week you may not be boyfriends and girlfriends. So then they have this photo. So I always tell kids, do not send photos of yourself, period, to anybody. And don't have them in your cell phone, because we've had cases where kids would take their best friend's cell phone and send it to themselves, and then it ends up all over the place. And then, obviously with privacy settings, you want to make sure that you constantly are checking your kid's phone for their privacy settings. You need to also check their phone and see what they're doing. Some of the parents question us and say, well, it's my kid's privacy. And I'm like, no, until your kid is 18 years old, that is your responsibility to keep them safe. And unfortunately, with the internet, they're talking to people, they're doing things they wouldn't normally do. So it's really important as a parent that you always go through their phone. And if you don't know what they're doing or what these apps are, Google it. I mean, as investigators and prosecutors, we're always trying to figure out how to keep these trends going. So you have to Google stuff and talk to other people so you can learn how these things are all working.
Join us for our next episode, where we'll continue our conversation about how to protect our children from online sexual predators.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can find all of the Justice Journal podcasts on our website at sacda.org, iTunes, Google Play, and YouTube.